Welcome to Genomics. The world is changing geopolitically and economically at a rapid clip. President Donald Trump's swift yet shifting imposition of tariffs on many regions, including allies like Canada and Europe, and his near withdrawal from the NATO has turned the world order upside down, as it were. It now almost seems like US and Russia are in one camp and Europe and China are in the opposing camp. Separately, on the economy side, with Europe going in for a 1% higher fiscal deficit, bond yields, inflation, growth forecasts have all got to be raised. In the East, China seems to be rising after almost a decade of slowdown, while Japanese yields are now at 16-year highs. To understand the seminal changes in the world and in the world's largest economy, that is the US, I have with me Professor Kenneth Rogoff, Professor of Economics at Harvard University. He has been Chief Economist at IMF and author of several well-known books, so an undoubted expert on international economy as well. Professor Rogoff, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you, sir. I'm going to start the conversation closer to your home, the United States. One of the pressing problems of investors all over the world has been this US exceptionalism over the past 12 months, particularly since the election of President Trump. Now, with fresh doubts over US growth, is this exceptionalism coming to an end?
Well, I don't think the exceptionalism is coming to an end. I think the next 10 years for the United States are going to be very strong. But near term, President Trump has just sort of intimated that, oh, by the way, a recession might be in my master plan for making the economy better. So as confused as investors were already, they're even more so.
Okay, but would you still wonder if in the near term, for the year 2025, US growth forecasts may have to be lowered because of tariffs?
Not just because of tariffs, but the sort of aggressive and somewhat random cutting of government spending, the unpredictability of policy. I think it looks like US growth is downshifting to maybe 1% towards the end of the year. I don't think that's normal, but yes, absolutely. The risks are going up and up. I mean, whatever Trump's master plan is, it's very hard to know where he's going. And that unpredictability is very difficult for investors to work around.
Okay. This unpredictability is now not just US specific. It is a global issue because most countries don't know where their own policies are headed and therefore where their economies are headed. So can there be a danger to global growth because the investment climate is uncertain?
Well, I don't want to overstate it. I mean, Europe's having a wake-up call. Europe's been in a coma the last decade at least, and now they're suddenly realizing that they need to make a shift from just aging and expanding the welfare state to trying to be more dynamic, to have their own AI industries, and by the way, to defend themselves. And I think, you know, all of that could in the long run be good for Europe's economy. China is another matter. If we're going around the world, I still don't think they're doing nearly enough to right the ship. The over-centralization of power and decision-making has been disastrous for China. And I don't yet think they've figured that out.
Okay. Well, it's good to hear that there are countervailing forces in Europe and China, which may actually keep the global growth going. I was coming to Europe in just a minute. That was the other big theme I wanted to discuss with you. But let me just finish with the US issue. How do you see US inflation? If products were to get expensive simply because of higher tariffs, are we looking at no rate cuts from the Fed and the general inflation picture? Some people have increased their forecast of US inflation to 3% by the end of 2025.
I think the risk to U.S. inflation have gone up, and the U.S. Risk to U.S. recession have also gone up. So it makes it a little bit difficult to call. If you asked me 2 months ago, say at Davos, what was happening to U.S. rates, I would say there's likely to go up as to go down. I think they're a little more likely to go down than up at this point. I think the recession risks are real. In many ways, Donald Trump has accelerated trends that I think were happening anyway. I have a book forthcoming in a month or two, Our Dollar, Your Problem, where it's a historical book, but it sort of says we may come back to the 70s in some ways. There may be another burst of inflation. I was saying 5 to 7 years, and now, Donald Trump's an accelerant of all these factors. So the risks are high. I think Donald Trump's people say, we are going to go to 4% growth at the other side of this. You can't believe how good it's going to be. I think it's more likely we're going to go to 4% inflation at the other end of this than 4% growth.
Oh, yes, I have heard of your book and the famous words of your Senator John Connolly, wasn't it? Who said, our currency, your problem.
Very good.
Fair point. I'll just come to that, this overturning of global, what is right in terms of the dollar's position. But before that, Europe, you touched on that. Europe has agreed to an expansion of its deficit after, 30 years? It's after Maastricht that we are first hearing of a higher than 3% deficit. What does this mean? Do you actually see that generating sufficient growth for Europe? Will you up your growth forecast, if you have any, for Europe?
Well, Europe's been in a torpor for sure. We're talking about Germany running a bigger deficit, and the whole point of having a strong balance sheet is to be able to use it when you need it. You're suddenly being told that the U.S. might not defend you. By the way, I don't think the U.S. is really going to pull out of NATO. We may have to rename it. Trump may insist on renaming it. I don't think we're going to pull out of it. But I think they've realized they have to spend more. That does not translate into necessarily Italy being able to spend more, Spain being able to spend more. Let's understand, interest rates have gone up. It's a different world than 10 years ago, so it's not going to be so easy. But on balance, Europe needed shaking up, and this is, as many have described as a Hamiltonian moment. You can pick your analogy as you like, but Europe has really been sinking the last 20, 25 years. It was equal to the United States 20 or 25 years ago. People forget. And so, yes, Europe can come back.
Okay. But for the world as a whole, if European, or as you say, German deficit goes up and the US deficit, it's difficult to see now how much it will come down from the 7%, considering
it's still going up. Yeah.
It's still going up, especially because the announcement is, the intent is of tax cuts.
Exactly.
Then we are going to look at a year of inflation, or maybe years of higher inflation than we are used to?
Well, it depends on what central banks do. So if central banks keep interest rates high enough, raise interest rates enough, we will not get inflation. But there are going to be a lot of challenges to central bank independence, not just because of Trump. I think that's been coming from the left and the right. So I do think eventually this will translate into higher inflation. I'm not sure about this year. That's really a coin toss. I suspect U.S. inflation, is as likely to come down as up, because we may even have a recession.
Oh, yes. You said that earlier, that, there is a very good possibility. Recession risks have been raised higher by, I think Goldman Sachs did that, from 15% to a 20% chance of a recession in the United States. But Professor Rogoff, let me persist with the U.S. actions. You say that the Trump will not pull out of NATO, but he has pulled out of the World Health Organization. Do you think there is a chance that the World Bank and the IMF will also be attacked? Will there be any chance of the U.S. either not contributing or contributing far less to these organizations as well?
I think it's a very serious risk. I mean, I think it would be, particularly in the case of the International Monetary Fund, and of course I used to be there, so the listener should know that, but I think it'd be a very serious mistake. The International Monetary Fund's been very good for the U.S. economy for a long time. Countries mostly pay back their loans. But yes, I think there's a rethinking of everything. I don't know what the thinking is. I mean, it's been very aggressive, muscular. But if you're going to pull out of the USAID, that's our aid organization, I think a lot of right-wing Republicans regard the World Bank, at least, as an aid organization. And I fear that a lot of them don't know the difference between the IMF, which is fighting financial fires and such, and the World Bank. So yes, I think it's highly unpredictable. We could see a Musk-type figure appointed to the World Bank. That's not hard to imagine. I think the World Bank and the IMF are both doing very great things for the world. I'm not supporting this, but they are absolutely right to be worried about it.
Okay. I'll come back to the global economy and the redrawing of boundaries and rules of the game, as it were. But just a digression, since you have written a book on the curse of cash as well, there is this other announcement from Donald Trump, in fact, signing of an executive order of creating a strategic reserve of cryptocurrencies. At the moment, it appears to be only with, the clandestinely earned currencies and, appropriated by the law, the police. But do you think that even good money, tax money, can be used to buy cryptos? Do you fear that this is another area of instability?
Well, this is just an awful idea. I mean, of course, it's supported by the crypto community. And I have to say, so many elements of this are just, incredible. For one, if you're going to have a reserve, you want to have some sort of arm's length committee pick what would go into it instead of having the president announce what coins are going to go into it, which of course bids up their price before we buy them. But of course, the crypto community helped fund both campaigns, by the way, and in some sense, this is a payoff. I don't know where this is going, but I think right now it appears that we're headed towards another kind of financial crisis in this space if we really go whole hog on deregulating it. I hate to say how it's going to play out. That would require forecasting Donald Trump's policies, which is very difficult to do.
Yes, I will come to that as well, time permitting. But mine is, of course, an emerging market audience. So your thoughts on how this argument for reciprocal tariffs may play out. That's the biggest worry that's bedeviling Indian policymakers. Do you think this administration, the Donald Trump administration, will go through with reciprocal tariffs the way they are speaking about it now?
Well, it's a terrible idea. I'm an economist, and all the people. The Trump administration has some very good economists in it. Let's understand that, but they would get kicked out if they complain about the tariffs. So every single one said, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, as an example, said very sensible things. I've been impressed, but he has to say that tariffs are a good idea. They're not. And I think a thing your audience should understand is that the country that suffers the most from imposing tariffs is the one that does it. India certainly suffered from its tariff policies. They've come down, but it's not benefited, and your listeners, I think, know that. And the United States is not going to benefit from these. It's going to hurt growth. It's going to hurt inflation. On the other hand, the effects are not massive. I don't think we could overstate it. The big risk is that everyone else feels free to do it. The United States is raising tariffs. Why shouldn't we raise tariffs? And one thing I think that's not so well known is that this is actually due to work by Gita Gopinath at the International Monetary Fund and a co-author done before perhaps she went, that when the U.S. imposes tariffs, the price gets almost entirely borne by U.S. consumers. But interestingly, if foreign countries retaliate, maybe only half of it gets borne by foreign consumers, and American exporters bear the rest. In other words, the U.S. does not win in a tariff war.
Okay, this is a very significant study, and perhaps needs to be publicized a little more, both in your country and others. Professor Rogoff, I need to take a very quick commercial break. It'll be a short one. We are back with a few more questions for you on the way the world and the US economy will shape up in 2025 itself.